Hello and welcome to Faith Works Live. It is a beautiful day in the neighborhood, and I have a smile on my face because we get to talk about two things that I greatly love. Number one, my country and the history of my country. Y'all know if you're an OG that I am a kind of a proud nerd, history nerd. And I married one. And so our library is grand enough that it flat out has us losing friends over moving. Like I've been told so many times that they're not going to help us move anymore because we have too many books. That's the state we're talking about. But a lot of them are American history books because of how much we appreciate the uniqueness of our legacy. And the other thing that we get to talk about is creative endeavors by Christians to discuss the best story ever told. And since God himself is a storyteller, I've always said that Christians should be the best at artistry and creativity and creating in the manner that he creates. And so we get to talk to one of those creators on the line right now. Tim Mahoney is our special guest. Tim, it's an honor to have you join us.
Well, thank you for having me, Rebecca.
Course. Well, I have to say that we're fans of your work in this house. I know we've watched Patterns of Evidence. We've watched several of your documentary projects in the past, and we've recommended them to friends too, because it answers a lot of questions and it even poses some more distinct others when we're talking about the historical veracity of scripture and what we know based on archaeology. So this is not your first, it's not a film we're talking about, but just as an opener, how many films have you done at this point?
Well, I participated in, this is my 10th major film. I've made a few other TV specials and things like that. And what's unique about this is that in most all of these films, I'm looking for a pattern of evidence. And so what happened is that a friend of mine, Michael Medved, who was in my first film, Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus, he is an author. He was a radio commentator. He is also a film critic. And I had used him in a debate in the Exodus Patterns of Evidence film in the very beginning, and we had been friends. I then used him again in the Moses controversy, and there's been about 7 Patterns of Evidence films right now, and I'm on the 8th one. But he wrote this book. I'll show it to you, called
The American Miracle.
Yeah, Divine Providence in the Rise of the Republic. And that led to us. He said, I've written this book. He actually wrote 2 of them, but this became a New York Times bestseller. And he called me one day and said, would you help me turn this book into a film? And I had to think about it because, I mean, it's a big project. It's American history and the war and everything. And eventually, after praying about it and thinking about it, guess what? It's another Patterns of Evidence film, except it's 3,000 years different time period,
Right.
So that became The American Miracle. Notice the fancy graphics we have today. And so The American Miracle, our subtitle is Our Nation is No Accident, which means there was an intentionality. We believe this film tells the story of God's intentionality for this nation to be born. And that it has a purpose, and so the question that some people would ask is, well, is America a good place? And because you're hearing people that have a whole nother narrative, and that narrative isn't, I don't believe at all what our history was, and that's why this forgotten story that came out of this book and now is made into this movie, The American Miracle, is such an important one because we're coming up to a 250th anniversary of our nation, and a lot of people have said a lot of things about the country, and we have amazing scholars in this film, and the reason we put them in the film was because we needed somebody that you would respect from Yale or from Princeton, Pulitzer Prize winning authors that have a lot of credibility to say, yeah, that really happened. It happened that way. Yep. Because our founding of our nation. So we take the story from, well, it begins in 1826. The film actually begins with the 50th birthday of America. And why that's significant is that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson actually lived 50 years after they signed I'm not sure if they both signed the Declaration, but let's assume that after they signed these documents, the Declaration and the Constitution, um,
Hmm.
they they died then, made it to that day, and both died on
On
the
July 4th.
yes,
Yeah.
1826. And many people felt that was a sign from God of the rightness of our nation. And so that was the amazing part of all this. So they felt that it was a big deal.
Yeah. And Tim, as you're saying this, I think it is worth noting, especially at this time, as we're getting ready to honor the special anniversary of our nation, that it's been 250 years since we became a distinct, a new nation. And we're often called an ideological nation because of that declaration that not only that God governs in the affairs of men, but that also we, as a distinct people, are given our rights not by government or not by a king, but from God, from our heavenly creator, that it is an individual right, and that those individuals therefore have the right to life, liberty, and as Thomas Jefferson put it, the pursuit of happiness, which is often equated with property. Those basic, that creedal statement that makes us who we are as Americans has been understood to be quite unique and has often been referred to for subsequent revolutions, for subsequent restructurings of government, precisely because it was this kind of landmark declaration in human history. But as you said, there are so many, there's that dueling narrative now that says actually America was evil from the beginning. People point to slavery, and they say, well, we weren't free and we weren't equal. And therefore, every system that America now represents has to be dismantled. That's a common word. And so they tend to look down on America and say, no, it's really nothing special. In fact, we're kind of awful. So, what's the big deal? Why don't we just completely restructure the nation? No biggie. We could become a socialist utopia. That's worked out so well. So how would you then defend? And I know that obviously the film that we're talking about is the defense of this, or the presentation of the evidence for it. But just in conversation with people, maybe you can give us a few bits of evidence as to why America is this miracle, this act of God in human history.
Some of the things that we focus on as we made the film, and once again, I'm a filmmaker who's trying to take and adapt this book into a movie. But when I do that, I often do an awful lot of reading of other books and we get other input. So we have 17, I think it's 17 other scholars that we interviewed. So there's like 35 to 40 hours of additional information. But then we want to make something entertaining. So we're dramatizing real historical events, and we begin, as I said, with that 1826 50th anniversary. But then the question is, well, was this, a miraculous 50 years? And because people look back on the nation, and historians have said, well, there's some unusual things that happened. So we go back to one person in particular, and that's George Washington. And the film focuses on him because I see, as I looked at it as a director and as a person who's trying to tell a story, you don't just want to give information. You want to have a hero. And in many ways, as we look at it, I think everyone would see that George Washington was the hero of the American Revolution. And not only that, but his life was being prepared from in a virtuous way to become that hero. He actually studied literature and how to be virtuous. And there was a sense, I think, of calling that he had, that he knew something special. And by the way, he lost his father when he was younger. And so he was trying to find a way. And I somewhat know what that feels like because my father was out of my life too as a young man. And you're trying to figure out what does it mean to be a man, And Washington began, we show that he began as a surveyor and he was asked to actually go and run a message to the French. And this is when we begin the story, the second part of this story with George Washington. And he encounters multiple times in his young life death, where he's face to face with it. One time he got the smallpox and he survived that. And then another time he was shot point blank at by a Native American when he was, going back to the, colonies or the states. And then He also fell into a icy river, and could have drowned or froze to death, and none of those things happen. And so
Mm.
he ends up writing a report, and becoming that report somewhat makes him famous. Now the next thing is he takes General Braddock and the British back to where he had come from, on this. I guess it was a military mission, and the British are surrounded by the French and Native Americans in the woods, and they are decimated, and all the officers are shot, and many of them die. It's a massacre, and the only person who survives, only officer that survived that, was George Washington, but
Wow.
he survives it with bullet holes through his clothes, four of them, I believe. His hat was shot off, and two horses are shot out from underneath him. And it was reported that he was dead, but he wasn't dead. So
Mm.
this is the story we're telling in this movie, in The American Miracle. And the miraculous begins with George Washington's life. And then we there's a prophecy that's given later by one of the Native Americans who was in that battle. And he said, and we show this as well. And I want you to know something really, really, really cool. If you geek out on things, how would you like to film a scene at the very location where the battle happened, and also with the descendants of the natives that were in the battle, in
Wow.
in their ceremonial, in their authentic dress with their authentic war paint?
That was so cool.
Wouldn't that be?
That's-
That
You're
was,
like, I
and that
got to
is
do
what we
that.
did.
I'm telling you, it was. It would be awesome.
Yeah. And
Well,
so,
and oh, go ahead, Tim.
no, I was just going to say, it just brought joy. I just couldn't hardly believe that we were doing that.
Yeah, and telling the story again, this is our story. It's part of, and I'm not one to sugarcoat history in any way. Clearly there are some very ugly chapters, and and still are, because we're all sinful human beings. We're all in need of a savior. So it's not as though every story is going to be an illustrious one or a glorious one. But I do think that we have, in our attempt to highlight, I think, all the negatives of America's past, that we've now almost stopped telling the story of the heroes of our past, even in, in living color. And I think that we, as at least for my generation and the one coming up next, we long for that. Everyone needs to be able to understand that there is something to fight for, some sort of an identity, some sort of an ideal that we're clinging to, that we're hungry for. And it's not wrong to raise kids with the truth of who men like George Washington were. Part of the reason, again, not sinless, but they believed in, they had these sense of higher ideals, of higher calling, of duty and honor that was very important to them, that their life was not just about themselves, which I think in this age, again, is that gospel call to say, it's not about you, kid. It's not. And especially given these miraculous events that you're describing, I think that Washington says in his papers that that was a turning point, and he often talks about providence in relationship to his life, providence in the country. Can you talk a little bit about what he means, what the founders mean when they talk about providence and God governing in the affairs of men?
Well, I was wondering that question when I first started this, and I think a good definition of providence, and we put it in the film actually, so people would know it. It was a common word used. I mean, it was used, by different people to say, and I think they were trying to say the presence of God. The presence of God was there in a battle, and it protected. The presence of God would allow something to happen. So in fact, it's a really very interesting concept. It's almost as if it's the Holy Spirit. The Spirit of God comes. And the Israelites, working with the Exodus, the Israelites had, in a sense, the presence of God in the pillar of fire at night and the pillar of the cloud by day. And so they wanted to have, they acknowledged that God was there in their midst, and because certain things were protecting them. There was a presence that was protecting Washington. There was a presence that was protecting the Continental Army. Didn't mean that people didn't get shot and die, but for example, in the very beginning of the war, George Washington and the Continental Army, they try to defend New York, and they can't. They get there's too many ships and too many British, and there's 30,000 British that basically roll over the Continentals, and it's amazing, what happened. And then Washington is just like got pushed all the way up to one end, and we're going to show you this in the film. This whole
Mm.
what happened, and that night, it looks like it's going to be over the next day. And I believe that the providence and presence of God inspired Washington to think about a retreat. So he plans to get a retreat across the East River, but there's a wind blowing, which is providential, that it's blowing in one direction, and it kept the British warships from coming up and surrounding his escape route. And then something unusual happens. Shouldn't have happened at all at that time of year. A dense fog comes over the top of Washington's army and over the river, and it covers their escape that night. And the British, they realized that at that moment, that was the moment they could have ended it all, and the American Revolution would have been finished. And Joseph Ellis, two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, says, that's what they said.
Mm.
How could all these things have happened?
Yeah.
Coincidence after coincidence after coincidence, all in favor of George Washington and the Continental Army. And anyway, that's what this film is telling. This important for series of forgotten testimonies, as it were.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think you made an allusion almost to the nation of Israel coming out of Egypt, the Exodus, and I know that likeness was very important. That metaphor, at least for Benjamin Franklin, for example, he believed that there was a distinct parallel, that God was working in the lives of this burgeoning American nation in the same way that the hand of providence was seen in the plagues in Egypt and the rescuing of the nation of Israel to become its own distinct people. And that was a very important parallel for him in the identity of the nation. And I think that, again, you mentioned I suppose the comeback would be, well, those are all just coincidences. How could you say that you're just kind of backfilling God into all of these things? You can't prove any of these, that all of this was intentional. And yet it's the frequency, and I think how impactful these miracles actually were, that these events, what is it that is that miracles do not cluster? And that is when we see this cluster of unique, unprecedented, unpredictable, and yet auspicious events, that it really is the hand of providence. That one is a pattern of evidence, as you would say, that God
Yeah,
is at work here.
that's right. And I think why it's important for us to know about that today is that we might wonder, well, is God still at work? What's going on?
Mm.
And the film, it demonstrates, I think, through these different events that there is a dependency that the founders realized that they had to place in God. And that, listen, right from the very beginning, when they had the Declaration, they were declaring independence from a king. And the reason they felt they could do that is because the king was being unjust. And the thing that's really wonderful about the film and how we structured it is that there's a timeline. And so for the average person who didn't pay attention when they were in school,
Sure.
this film is gonna help you in a short period of time. It's a 2 hour and 17-minute film. It's going to help you get what you didn't know or didn't remember, and we're going to tell the forgotten story. And so it's going to unfold it for you. So you're going to have the basic understanding, cliff notes, but a lot more dramatic. And we're going to show you when it happened, how it happened, and why it was important for it to happen. And you're going to see that this film subtitle is "Our Nation is No Accident," is that it seems as if, and many people, even to this day, there is a sense that America has a mission, and that America was founded and has been sustained because there's a purpose that it has in the nations of the world. And I think that might be a very important understanding for many of us because there's other voices now that are trying to say that America is evil and it had an evil founding. That stuff doesn't resonate. And we've got the top scholars saying, yeah, that's not what the history is. That's
Hmm.
a history that some people want because they want to overthrow this Constitution and they want to overthrow these ideals. But that's not what this film is about, and that's not what the history or the truth of that history is either.
Yeah. And I think telling people, especially in their own words, in the context of their day, to look at what really happened is so critical. I think it is telling that the people who don't like what America stands for now have to essentially fail to educate or to re-educate in order to bring down some of those ideals to start dismantling the culture. I, on the other hand, would rather teach the kids more history. I think that we all need to understand where we've come from, the phenomenal accomplishments and the uniqueness of our nation. I think there's a wonderful work that God has done, that he does govern in the affairs of men. And as Paul puts it in Acts 17, he does this. He orchestrates the times and the boundaries of our habitation, as he says, so for a purpose, so that men would seek God and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. That's the point. And that could be true for any nation at any time in history, but we can celebrate what he's done through our specific nation and at our specific time, and the fact that God is not done yet and that he is still continuing to work. That's my meaning, that I'm extrapolating out of the fact that if this isn't an accident and you and I are here on purpose, then we were made for this time, that this is our time, and that he has a mission for us in the same way that he did for George Washington and Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and that we are then responsible for that mission for our generation as well, Tim. And part of that is to know the story of our people and to know when we are aligning with God's truth. That's what we're here to do. That's when we can shine like the city on the hill, as Ronald Reagan once quoted from Jesus' sermon. But Tim, I wonder, I know we've got just a few minutes left. What would you say was the biggest challenge in the production of this movie? I know it can be hard to distill a best-selling book into a movie, and that was your challenge. But what would you say was the most difficult part that you faced during the production?
Well, if you'd allow me to give you a couple of them,
Oh, sure. Why not?
yeah.
Two for the
First,
price of one.
yeah. First of all, I think I had to believe it could be done, and so and I got John Groder as a friend of mine to take this and to compile it into a script. That helped me, and then after I was able to look at the script, I had to think, am I able to make this into a film? And I thought maybe somebody else should do it. But then I thought and prayed, and I started to draw storyboards. So I storyboarded out the entire film. It's probably about 1,100 pictures. And I'm not an artist, but I, scratched it out, and then I got an artist to help me. And
Mhm.
so we were able to get that done. Then I felt like, well, now I understand what it is I'm trying to do. And so creatively understanding how to, and then we had to look back at it again and say, well, what's missing in this story? Because when you get something like this and you don't really know it all, you're trying to turn it into this movie. Um, uh, it's like looking at music on a sheet music, like drawn out,
Sure.
and then hearing it. So,
Mm.
you can write it down but in order to be able to hear it in your head, that's another thing. Well, the same thing is true for me to be able to see the movie and understand. And I could tell that there are certain characters that needed more screen time. And so I modified an awful lot. I probably modified by adding about 40% more information than was in the book to make the film what I believed it needed to become. And because books are different than films, and you have storylines of people, and you have a hero, and you've got multiple characters. You can kind of jump from chapter to chapter in a book. So creatively speaking, I had to sort that part of it out. And
Hmm.
then it was a matter of how do we cast, 400 people?
Right.
Because
No small thing.
there's like 90 speaking parts, and and you're trying to figure out, well, can I get the right people? And sometimes you have people that could play two or three roles, and you're trying to figure that out. And uh, and then finally, I think um, it start shaping it, because then so you film all the drama, and then you go get all the interviews, and then you have to then organize all that to figure out how am I going to weave those interviews in and out of the story. And I love doing that, and I've done quite a bit of it already. So uh, it was a joy. I think the bigger challenge then is, can no one interrupt me for a while, because I've got to stay really focused, and because I got
Right.
these. I'm weaving these threads together, as it were, to tell this story.
Hmm.
Um, and then you're always wanting to have a very good beginning, and then a very good ending. And we were able to do that. But I didn't feel as if I was editing alone, or I felt as if the Lord was helping me weave this story together. And I will be very, open about that. There were times I would pray, and I was like, oh, okay, I get this idea. And I knew it was, we use the word divine inspiration, but I think there's a lot of that creatively if you're open to it. And you have a sense that I'm participating. I think this wasn't just my story. This is a story I believe that the Lord wanted people to know, because it's true, and it's a forgotten story. And I'll share that one last thing is that in the book of Exodus, throughout the Bible too, there's a phrase that says, "Do not forget what God did by bringing you up out of Egypt." He's talking to the Israelites. He says, "Don't forget. I mean, this is a big deal. I took you out of Egypt. I freed you from the Pharaoh, and you had these miraculous events where the plagues came, and eventually you were trapped out of sea, and you were freed. I parted the water and I destroyed your enemies, and then
Yeah.
I gave you water from a rock, and I brought you to the mountain, and I spoke to you, and you agreed to be my people." Well, it's kind of interesting is that America, in some ways, you could say this somewhat similar thing is we, and not only that, the founding fathers saw the connection between the Israelites and America,
Hmm.
that they were freed from this oppressing, tyrant of a king, and they wanted their liberty. And in fact, the Liberty Bell actually has a scripture verse on it. You might know what that verse is. uh, uh, and Anyway, the whole point I'm making here is that we need to be reminded of our past and where we came from, because it helps to coordinate where we're going in the future. And they were looking at the presence and the providence of God in the past. And I think we're at a point where we want to look for the presence and providence of God in the present.
And because you gave me enough time to Google, I've seen the Liberty Bell, but I couldn't remember which verse it was. And it is proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof, from Leviticus 25. And that's the mission in a nutshell. That was the mission of the nation of Israel in that time. And I think we can rightly adopt that as the American people in our time. And exactly as you said, if we're a people with a mission, then we should choose to accept it. But I think we have to know about it. And I think this film will do a phenomenal job of educating, again, some of that forgotten history and maybe renewing it for the people that kind of think, oh, yeah, like George Washington, he's a pretty good guy, pretty strong guy. But I don't know that we know the fullness of all those details, and that this film will help bring that to life. And again, help convict us that we can live as a nation on a mission, as a city on a hill, and that starts with each of us individually, because that's really what the story of our nation is about. There's a lot of very exceptional people who I think were exceptional because they had a unique understanding of God's purpose in their lives, that it was way bigger than those individuals, that it wasn't just about me, but it's about submitting our lives in accordance with his plan, his glory, and recognize God's doing something here. I'm about something here. It's not that I'm so great or pursuing our own greatness, but it's about working in concert, in invitation with that grand tapestry that God is weaving, and each of us get to be a thread in that grand design. And what an honor that is. And so we get to see the true story. I always love that. It's a true story, Hollywood says. In this case, that's really true, of the American miracle. Now, the cool thing is that you get to see this in theaters, but it's only for 3 days here in this next week. So you've got to buy your tickets now. And what's the easiest place? Can people just go to their local movie theaters, or is there a specific specific website they should go to?
I think there's two places to go. But first, I'll tell you is AmericanMiracleMovie.com. AmericanMiracleMovie.com, where you can get a link and get tickets. You can also go to Fathom Events and look up American Miracle Movie. And we're just making sure that all the links and everything are working. And so that's the best way. It's only going to be in theaters Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, June 9, 10, and 11. June 9, 10, 11. And so you need to see the movie right now. And when you were talking, I just thought of something, Rebecca, is that I believe that the Liberty Bell was, I mean, it's 50 years is the year of Jubilee, I think. 50th, every 50th year in Israel was the year of Jubilee.
I think you're
So
right.
we're coming up on our fifth Jubilee, if you take that idea to that level. So we've had this five times we've experienced 50-year segments, and in each one of those 50 years, there's been major events in history. So we're approaching a milestone, and we're going to be moving into another phase of our nation. And
Right.
so that's why these things are, I think, important to reflect and understand what's going on in this movie. It's highly been esteemed, and we got great endorsements. You can find those on the websites, and I think that's about it for now. So
Well, it sounds like everyone needs to get out to the theater. It sounds like the Haneys will be on the front row of our local theater. So we will be excited to see the American Miracle. Check out American Miracle Movie and as the website in order to get your tickets, or Fathom Events, whichever you prefer. I'll pop the links down below, so check those out as well. And esteemed director Tim Mahoney, it is great to finally get a chance to talk with you, sir. And I really appreciate all that God's done through you and through your creative skill. Thank you.
well, thank you very much.
God bless you and the team. Again, this is your chance to see this movie and support the work that they are doing, as well as just to educate. Bring your kids. This would be the perfect opportunity to say, hey guys, this would be, and an entertaining way at that. So for those of you who aren't history nerds and kind of fell asleep in the classes, this would be a way more fun family event to go out and share the uniqueness of our nation, especially heading into the 250th anniversary. See what God has done in our past, and how the divine hand of providence is still at work and preparing a new work for our generation. So that's it for now. Thanks for listening to Faith Works Live. As you know, we have a mission, which is threefold: to love God, to serve people, and to live free. Until next time, this is Faith Works Live. At FaithWorks Live, we're proud to partner with InnerVision's Healthcare. In unplanned pregnancy and STD situations, they offer help and hope. It's all confidential and it's all free. If women are in a crisis pregnancy situation, they know that they can get real help at InnerVision's. Free pregnancy testing, free STD testing, free ultrasounds as well, to see that inner vision. Because women deserve the truth about their bodies, about their baby, about all of their options. And if a woman has gone down the road of seeking abortion through medication and she regrets that decision, InnerVisions also offers abortion pill reversal procedure, which is a life-saving, miraculous option to have right here in our own community. InnerVisions Healthcare, well worth supporting, providing those free services to women in crisis pregnancy. You can call them 24 hours a day at 515-440-2273. That's 515-440-2273. There's no better time than now to stand for life. And you can stand with Iowa's original pro-life organization, Pulse for Life. They're the longest standing nonprofit pro-life organization in Iowa, and they are dedicated to informing, educating, and inspiring a new generation to value the sanctity of all human life, from fertilization until natural death. They serve at the State House. They educate in classrooms, at events. They proudly serve on the coalition of pro-life leaders. They are on the front lines of the battle against this throwaway culture of death that we see all around us, and we are winning ground. Hearts and minds are changing, and the pro-life movement is continuing to grow. And you can be a part of the exciting things that are happening right here in our own backyard at pulseforlife.org, and get your finger on the pro-life pulse. Sign up for their newsletter, find ways that you can make a difference, and how you can change hearts and minds with their pro-life apologetics course, pulseforlife.org.